Hello everyone, this is Professor Reha, here with, as the title states, 3 apologies and some corrections. Now the first thing I want to talk about is very specifically, Crab Turtle pointed out to me in my class examination of the Paladin class that I made 2 mistakes. 1, I misunderstood at that time how dual wielding works. I was incorrect about how dual wielding works. 2, I was incorrect with how Guardians of Empyrean work. I will explain these in sequence, but shout out to Crab Turtle for correcting me, or at least pointing out the fact that I was in error. Now, when I was informed that I was mistaken about the dual wielding, I immediately set about to update and educate myself on this. So, my original preconception of dual wielding, based on how I believed the skill worked, was that you would just be using your regular attack speed on your primary weapon, and you would have a percentage chance of just randomly attacking with the other one, right? This was my original perception. This was wrong. What actually happens is you have a 50% chance of firing or attacking with both your weapons, and a 25% individual chance of using either one of them individually. In other words, you have a 50% chance of hitting with both, and a 50% chance of hitting with either one of your weapons individually. So, what does this mean for damage output? Well, in terms of raw damage output, generally speaking, you're only going to be hitting for about somewhere between the minimum and maximum that you can hit. Because when you attack with both of your weapons, obviously you're doing the combined damage of those 2 weapons. I'm going to create an example. Let's say you have a 2-handed gun that does 200 damage, and you have 2 pistols that do 100 damage each. We're going to remove minimum and maximums. We're just going to say they do just these flat amounts of damage. So your 2-handed gun is always going to consistently do 200 damage. Your dual-wielding pistols are going to do 100 damage whenever they don't attack together, and 200 damage when they do. Now, because that's only a 50% activation, and of course this again depends on your attack speed, but roughly speaking, you will be doing, on average, in the same amount of time, let's say over the course of a second, you'll be doing 150 damage a second, as compared to, say, the 2-handed gun, which is doing 200 damage a second. Roughly speaking. Again, this depends on your attack speed, because, obviously, the higher your attack speed, the better off the 2-handed gun is. But, then again, using single-hand weapons is always consistently faster anyways. That's just something of, that's just inherent to single-hand weapons, and having a second single-hand weapon does not increase your attack speed anymore. It's just potentially going to be used instead or with your primary weapon. But this might bring up the question of, well, why would I want to dual wield then? Let me create for you a very specific example. And the important difference here between 2-handed weapons or dual wielding is the world of augments and components. So let's go into, let's say we want to do Malmuth's Will, okay? Let's just put Malmuth's Will out there. Now this is a 2-handed weapon boost. This provides you, I'm going to ignore the health and vitality resistance for a second. It's increasing all of these damage types by 120%, right? That is 1 augment on 1 gun, the 2-handed gun. Now we go to the 2 single-hand guns. You see that these are increasing it by 55%. Now you put that on 2 pistols, and you're going to wind up with 110% damage boost. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so you're 10% damage down, and you're doing 75% damage DPS on average, theoretically speaking, compared to the 2-handed gun, right? Correct so far. But then you come to components. Now let's go to, oops, that's not what I wanted to talk to. I want to talk to you. Let's go down to here and talk about Hellsbane ammo. Now, with a 2-handed gun, you can only assign 1 of these, so you're increasing your lightning damage by a further 25%. Okay. So, now, your lightning damage with a 2-handed weapon is being increased by 145% damage. But if you take 2 Hellsbane ammos on 2 individual guns, and you realize that is a boost of 50% lightning and electrocute damage, which is taking your 110 to 160, which means that your two single-hand guns are boosting your lightning damage by 15% more than your two-handed weapon. So now comes the question. Professor, specifically, when should I use dual wielding? Well, it comes down to a couple of questions. Now, melee dual wielding is something of an interesting exception. If you're using the Nightblade's dual wielding skills at the very top bar, you're always going to want to dual wield with those because obviously they all connect, and you've got the potential to do extra poison damage, extra vitality damage, extra bleeding damage with those. You have the chance of doing the execute on both of them, etc. That's fine, but if you're using something like an individual skill or a piece of equipment that allows you to dual wield like ranged expertise, it comes down to whether or not your primary mode of offense is going to be your abilities or your auto attacks. For example, if I were to maximize ranged expertise, and I really wanted to go hardcore into bursting round and storm spread, and I threw in chilling rounds, and maybe I wanted... Well, actually, let me rephrase this. Adjusting my build by maximizing ranged expertise and focusing on fire strike, I would want to use a two-handed weapon. There are two reasons for this. One is that because ranged expertise is increasing my attack speed, and fire strike is specifically increased by my main hand damage, which you can see is 5,000 plus, then you would really want that increased damage there from the main hand weapon. But if you're talking about skills, if you're talking about your abilities, it really depends upon how much you want to increase that damage by, specifically. Furthermore, if you were going into Fire Strike, it might be worthwhile, you would have to run your own numbers for this, but it might be worthwhile dual wielding just to increase your fire damage by an extra 15%. Of course, there's Searing Might, which changes this stat a decent bit. This actually modifies your total damage by 18% at max. So that actually outshines the individual bonus you would get from the dual wielding. So in the case of Fire Strike with Searing Might, two-handed ranged weapon would be better. Nevertheless, for me personally, considering that I'm going with only these two really and some small points in Fire Strike, it's not really a big deal. But consider your abilities and skills. For example, notice Stunjax does not pull any damage off of my main hand weapon. Neither, for that matter, does Vindictive Flame, nor does Ulzwin's Wrath, nor does Stormbox of Elgoloth. None of these rely on my main hand damage. None of these. These do. Storm Spread does a very small amount, and Bursting Round does by quite a substantial amount. But with the exception of my default weapon triggers, none of these boosts are boosted by my main hand weapon damage. So for my particular build as we stand now, it would be more effective in the long term for me to use two pistols, augment them, slap on components, and work with those, because those will boost the damage of my skills more, specifically by 15% more, than a single two-handed gun will. Now, I haven't found the individual pistols that I want to use, but that's the rough shape of this. The second mistake I made is that I always believed that the Guardians of Empyreon, specifically, were able to pull aggro. I came to this conclusion from a pair of mistakes that I made, actually. Now, for context, I've been playing Grim Dawn for a very long time. I've been playing it, I would say, what was it, this game was released in 2016, but I didn't start playing it right away then, because I didn't know it existed then. So it was sometime in, I would say, mid-2017 that I began playing this, and then Forgotten Gods was released, a bunch of years later. And when Forgotten Gods was released, I wanted to test the Oathkeeper with the best situation possible, which would be playing with family. Okay. So at some point, we're experimenting, we're playing and everything, and we're trying to figure out Oathkeeper, and I tried the Guardians of Empyrean. Now, one of my family members was playing tank, so I summoned my Guardians, And they were up there on the front lines with my family member, and I was convinced at that point that the Guardians of Empyrean were draining away or otherwise absorbing some of the damage that my family member would normally have been taking. And that is what I believed at the time based on all the chaos and mess there. And I've, even in solo playthroughs with the Guardians of Empyrean, I always assumed that the reason the enemies were targeting me was because I was doing so much damage that I was generating more threat. No, it has nothing to do with my threat level. It's just that the Guardians of Empyrean cannot be targeted, and I always was just assumed they weren't. I had always assumed they weren't being targeted because, hey, I was generating more threat. Nope, I'm just a space cadet apparently. So the Guardians of Empyrean cannot draw aggro. So I will be deleting the Paladin class examination when this video goes up. So by the time you're watching this, the Paladin video will be deleted. I will be re-uploading that with correct information. But I wanted to make those two apologies. Those are specifically mistakes of mine. There is a third mistake that I want to apologize for, and that is specifically to Case Deck, who asked me, rather specifically, which I misunderstood the question, they asked me why I didn't do resistance decreasing devotion skills. And I misread that as, why don't I do resistance increasing, not resistance reduction. So I misread that, which Crab Turtle also pointed out to me. So thank you again, Crab Turtle. But I did sort of explain that partially by accident, but a lot of resistance reduction skills do not often offer you up a lot of points in your specific grouping, so to speak, and why am I having a problem? Crab Turtle offered me the suggestion that I should try the Widow and the Rowan's Crown, because Rowan's Crown has Elemental Storm, which reduces target elemental resistance, which increases, of course, my lightning damage, and, of course, the Widow has the Arcane Bombs, which reduce lightning and aether resistance. Now, I'm going to do a couple of things here, very specifically, in answer to this, but this actually made me think of something else, a mistake that I was making. This actually made me realize a different mistake I was making with my devotion points. Now, I was going for Olzuin's Torch for the fire damage increase, which is respectable, and I was also going for the Blind Sage for the elemental damage increase. However, it has occurred to me that it would actually be easier for me to run Ultos Shepherd of Storms, who boosts very specifically lightning damage, and by more, you actually get, theoretically speaking, more straight damage boosts, although it does increase cold damage. That's not quite so big of a problem. It's mostly lightning focused, especially with the Hand of Ultos specifically doing lightning damage, so I could actually go for Olzuin's Torch plus Ultos Shepherd of Storms. Now, regardless whether or not I was going to run Blind Sage or Olzuin's Torch, or whether I run Ultos or Olzuin's Torch, getting to the Widow is somewhat specifically theoretically difficult, because this is quite out there in terms of blue. You need 4 here. Theoretically speaking, it wouldn't be too difficult, but there are a couple of things that I want to approach this with. So, let's go talk very specifically. My only real issue with the Widow is that there are more increases to Aether damage than there are for any other, than for the lightning damage. So it is a bit of a problem for me, because I don't personally do a whole lot of Aether damage. But this is an example of, somebody asked me why I encourage diversification, at least to some extent. This is one of the reasons why. Look how easy it would be for me to grab some Aether damage. Now, I pointed out, yes, this is increasing Aether damage, right? We have 70% increase in Aether damage that I don't do in my natural class, but if I were to grab Arcane Bombs for the sake of lightning resistance, look, I'm reducing their Aether resistance, and the Arcane Bombs do Aether damage. Granted, it's not much, but it's something. But it's so very easy. Even if you're focusing solely on one specific damage type, it is a absolute piece of cake to do some mild diversification of your damage just for the sake of a bit of variety. And for some damage types, for some combinations, like this combination, it is very important, in my opinion, to diversify slightly. I've said pretty consistently, elemental damage is a bit riskier of a damage type to focus on simply because there are a decent variety of enemies. Actually, most enemies will resist roughly 1/3 of your damage through some combination of resistances. And of course, there's also the potential problem of enemies just having so much resistance that... well, we'll not worry about enemy resistances, I'll talk about that another time. But nevertheless, it's very easy to incorporate extra damage types, so even if I am to focus purely on lightning damage because I want to go with Storm Spread and Full Spread as I've been playing this whole time and was my original set-out purpose of a quasi-improv build, this is, you know, obviously focused on lightning damage, this is obviously focused on lightning damage, but there is piercing damage here. I splash a bit of piercing damage. Oh look, a bit of piercing damage. I can also, look, splash in some physical damage here. We've got some internal trauma damage here. We've got a boosted in physical damage here. It's very easy to double that up. I've got some lightning damage here, obviously. We've got some fire damage here. Physical damage, it's already incorporated right in. I'm boosting lightning damage here. I'm also boosting fire damage here. Piece of cake. I could go all the way up to Static Strike, which increases my fire damage, gives me a chance for lightning damage. Along the way, I'm doing fire and physical. It's just, even if I'm focusing on one damage type, it is so incredibly easy to incorporate other damage types. For example, I could even go into Canister Bomb, which is normally Pierce and Fire. I go into Concussive Bomb, suddenly it's Lightning and Fire, right? Very easy to incorporate. Same thing with the Granado. I could very easily grab, say we're doing lightning damage, yeah, I could go into Stormbox, convert that into Olgoth's Arcane Net, convert the Stormbox itself into Aether damage, and then use a lightning tether for additional lightning damage if I so chose. I have just fire damage right here, for instance. It's just incredibly easy to incorporate some small extra damage types just in case of a really bad situation where an enemy has really abnormally high resistance to you and your resistance reductions for that damage type just aren't enough and you need a little bit extra, and that's fine. But it's both A, very easy to diversify slightly, and B, it doesn't hurt you. I'm already building stun jacks, why not maybe, if I find a piece of equipment that boosts lightning and physical damage, that's not a bad thing. If I find a piece of armor that increases elemental damage rather than just lightning damage, that's not a bad thing. You can see where I'm going with this, or even if I were to go with the Arcane Bomb, which I'm going to talk about in a hot second, even if I were to find something that increases Aether damage a little bit, you know, as long as it's also increasing lightning damage or some other damage type I'm doing, that's not necessarily a bad thing. So, diversifying your damage is incredibly easy to do, even if you're focusing on one specific damage type, which a lot of people do, and I understand and mostly agree with. I just don't want people to come into the game thinking, okay, I gotta choose one damage type, focus only on that, ignore all of the damage types. That's very dangerous in my opinion, when it's so incredibly easy to incorporate various other damage types while simultaneously purely focusing on some other damage type. It's so easy. Now, let's talk about my points. So, I'm readjusting. I'm going to drop the Blind Sage very specifically. I do love and appreciate the Elemental Seekers, but in the long term, the combination of Ultos and Ulzwin's Torch will increase my elemental damage overall, and Ultos increases my lightning damage much more specifically and still gives me some stun. Okay? So, there is that. So, I'm not really that concerned about any kind of loss of stun, and I think I can actually incorporate more. We'll have to see. I've got some leeway here. But obviously we're going to want to be talking about, this is going to be a really comprehensive devotion point video, but we're going to be looking towards Ultos and Ulzwins. So first we want to look at our maximums. We have 15 green as a maximum, okay, we have 10 blue as a maximum, and we have 8 red as a maximum. Alright, so how are we going to approach this? Well, let's try to make some logical decisions here first. Now, Crab Turtle specifically mentioned Rowan's Crown. This requires 4 purple. The green we're already going to be getting, but if we wanted to divert to here, this would require 4 purple. This is something I will only go for if, and only if, I have the Spare Devotion points, which there are a couple of techniques we can use here. Alright? So, let's start off with something specific. We're going to start off with green, because I know from green we can go into Scholar's Light, which is something we'll want. Elemental damage, Aether resistance, delightful, absolutely fantastic. Elemental resistance, elemental damage, we love it. We can also go into Quill, which we can do pretty safely, because first off we need the green. Second off, this puts us 1 point away from the purple we need for Rowan's Crown, in case we want to go for that. But mostly we're doing it for the green. So we have 8 green, right? We need 15. Okay. So we've got a couple of more things we can theoretically go into. Now, the first thing that I want to do is... Do we want to go into this, Falcon? No, not really. We don't really need that much purple. We only need 1 more. We can go into just the crossroads here, and then pull that back out after we're done with Rowan's Crown, if we have enough points for that. So we don't really necessarily need this, and this is a lot of damage that... While the physical is nice, we don't have any access to bleeding unless we went all the way with Falcon Swoop, and again, we don't need the purple. I am going to go into the Spider, though, because that's 6 green and some really great stat points here. Specifically, the attack speed is beautiful. The casting speed is nice, but it's not something I personally prioritize. The Spirit is really nice. The Cunning is really nice, especially with a ranged kind of magic user. I call it a hybrid auto, where some of my damage output is in my auto attacks, some of it is in my abilities. Storm Spread and Full Spread being my focuses. One of them is a default weapon attack, the other one is not, so, take it as take it or leave it as you go. That's entirely up to you. However, this does put us in a very strong position. We are now at 14, right? So, theoretically, maybe we want to go into the Hydra as well, because that'll put us to 17, and then maybe we go for the Mage, or maybe we just go for the Raven for the pure green here. It really depends, but let's talk a little bit about red, right? So let's actually wait. Where is the? We might want to go somewhere with a Spirit Medium or whatever they're called. Let's go to the Conclave of the 3 really quick and do this. Take a brief moment to get to someone who can readjust the devotion points. Now, the reason why a lot of these unequipped is because the stat boosts from my constellations has changed. I'm not really going to worry about that because we're late enough in the game where we have resources to cope. But let's talk about our red now. Now, we only need 8 red, specifically, okay? Now, I have a couple of options here. I could go into the Viper, which is actually something I'm going to do here, because this gives us some red, and it gives us some great stats. We have Cunning and Spirit, we have a chance to absorb energy, which is really nice. I do have some mild energy problems, so the Viper alone should solve this roughly 90% of the time. I'll probably still have to use the occasional energy potion, like I have been, but it'll just be less frequent use of energy potions. Vitality resistance and reduced elemental resistances for 3 seconds, just upon hitting the enemy with whatever I believe, if I'm reading this correctly. And plus 3% offensive ability, which is going to be very relevant later on. I'm going to do quite the interesting and complete overhaul here. So we have this. Okay, so we have our Viper. Alright, now we could go into the Widow. I'm still not quite sure we're going to go that far, even though we easily could. I'm going to get back to that in a hot second. But now we've opened up the Hydra, right? So let's go into the Hydra. Yeah? Okay, now we have the Hydra. That's delicious. Now, at this point, we have all of the green we need for Oldswin's Torch, right? Okay, great. And we obviously, as second nature, obviously we have what we need for Ultos. So, we no longer need the Crossroads point here. Now, offensive ability is nice, but wasting a devotion point on a single increase of plus 18 is not nice. Notice that this is a 3% offensive ability increase. This is a flat 18. I don't mind keeping the red and the yellow because these are a plus 5%. This is a percent increase. So this will actually scale with you into the late game, but the green, the purple, and the blue don't scale very well, and I can imitate this, but better, with various components and augments, and even just regular equipment I'm picking up off the floor. So I'm not really worried about the loss of 18 offensive ability here. And I have the Hydra, by the way, we already replaced the offensive ability here. We have more offensive ability here. We have plus 50% all damage, plus 5% attack speed. We're converting some of our damage. You've already seen the Hydra before. We're getting a little bit of physical damage, which is nice. We're getting a 4% increased offensive ability, but we're adding a little bit of physical damage. Now, physical damage isn't my favorite damage output. It's secondary here, but it's a nice little boost. And of course, we have our elemental damage increases from here, and we have our stat increases from the spider. We have the beautiful Viper as well. So we have our green now. We have all the green we need. Now we need our red. Now, I actually could go into some chaos damage, because if I was really determined to go into a auto-attack focused build, I could probably work my way up to a full fire strike with brimstone if I really wanted to, but that's very expensive and not specifically the direction that I want to take my build, so we're not going to do that, but it is something that is theoretically possible, right? But I could theoretically get away with some chaos damage, specifically if I went into Flame Torrent. No, I don't want to talk to you. Flame Torrent, which does chaos and fire. Or, alternatively, Eldritch Fire, which reduces fire and chaos resistance. It would be very easy to do. But, this doesn't really provide me with a whole lot of red or green, so I would have to have the spare points, and my primary focus right now is my lightning damage. I could very easily go into Fiend, but I don't really need the green either at this particular junction. Now, if I were to pull out the spider, then I would be down to 10, which would be down to 13. I'd be at 15. I could put 1 point here, but you can see where this would be quite a pain in the neck to do, so we're not going to do that. What we are going to do, though, is, in fact, actually just go into simply, at this point, the Ghoul. Because the Ghoul offers us a lot of great stats. We've got Physique, we've got 3% health, we have increased health regeneration, Physique and Spirit, attack conversion, and of course, the very delightful, we're going to put this on the Aura of Censure, 100% chance, yeah, that's fine, we'll keep that on. This will just help us, this will boost our attack speed under roughly half health, this will allow us to convert our attack damage at roughly under half health, this is just really nice to have. So now we can do the Oldswin's Torch. That's just fantastic, right? And we'll put this on Stunjacks? Yeah. Yep. And, you know, plenty of fire and physical damage. That's delightful. So now all we really need to do is grab our last pieces of blue, which we have a couple of different options here. We can go into the Lizard, which would be 7, and then we could go into the Widow, which would bring us to 10, which is actually where we're going to take this. And the reason why is because our only other real big option would be either Tsunami, which isn't bad itself, but what I'm really looking for here is the healing boost from the Lizard. We get more health regeneration, obviously. We get movement speed, which is never a bad thing. And we finally get health effects increased by 6%. And this is great with, of course, obviously, Word of Renewal. Now, also, another big benefit of the Lizard is that it only costs 3 devotion points. And we're going to hit exactly the amount of... we'll put this on Stormbox. We're getting exactly the amount of blue we need to get Ultos. Behold. Now, this is health and chaos resistance, which isn't a bad thing, but we want to go right to here first. Let's see. We'll put this on Inquisitor Seal, right? Because that isn't really a huge deal overall. Unless we want to... let's actually put that on Stunjacks, and we'll put this on Inquisitor Seal. And, no, that's not quite as consistent. Let's try Stormbox. 30% chance on attack. No. We'll go ahead with the Stunjacks. We'll go on ahead with the Inquisitor Seal, because, essentially speaking, every time we use Stunjacks, we're getting a Meteor Storm. Great. Guaranteed. Over here, it's every single time our Inquisitor Seal gets a crit. Now, it doesn't matter how much damage that critical does. Just the fact that it happens. And if we're standing on the Inquisitor Seal, enemies are standing on the Inquisitor Seal, and the Inquisitor Seal just does damage to people. That's basically it. Now, the question comes down to, can we work in Rowan's Crown? And the answer is kind of. This actually works out really great, because we actually have 5 points left here. Boink, boink, boink. right? So now we can put this somewhere. We'll put this on Stormbox for lack of anything better to put it on. For now, I'll be readjusting my skills as time goes on, so we'll put it on that, or we can put it on Firestrike if we really wanted to. 25%, Stormbox is 25%. Stormbox is probably a little bit more consistent, so we'll put it on there. But what we can do now is finish Rowan's Crown, go into here, pull out the purple, because now this is self-supporting. It's giving us exactly the 1 point we need in purple here. We go back into our devotion points. We put the final point here in Altos, and now we have a complete setup here of this. But I would like to point out, I would like to thank Crab Turtle for reminding me that the Widow exists. I actually forgot the Widow existed completely because I don't often use the Widow. But here we are with exactly, well, actually, we're slightly overcapped on the green, I think. Yeah, we're overcapped by 2 points, but that's not really a big deal. But here we are with a complete series of constellations, exactly all of the points used, perfectly, to where we need them to be. We have nice elemental resistance here. We have random elemental resistance here. This is basically just what I call runoff points. Once you complete your 2 main edge constellations, generally speaking, if you have leftover points, that's what you use them for. Just put them on here or whatever. I could have also equally have put them on Eldritch Fire, but I chose Rowan's Crown because specifically this is elemental resistance, which is both my fire and my lightning and my random cold damage that I'm doing, rather than specifically the fire and the chaos resistance, especially since I'm not as heavily invested into chaos as I am with elementals. I'm already splashing in some aether damage via Arcane Bomb. This is not assigned for some reason. We'll just assign this to Fire Strike for kicks. That was from when I was trying to figure out what Rowan's Crown was going to be assigned to. And we're just going to run with this. And that is how we're going to run the points here. But, yes, I did misunderstand the question by Case Deck originally, and I do apologize for that. I also forgot the existence of the Widow, specifically, and I also forgot Altos existed. I actually remembered Altos existed for some reason earlier today, when I was building with a different character, and I was like, okay, so I need Altos, and then it occurred to me, why am I not using Altos with Pure Theory, who is supposed to be doing primarily lightning damage? What is wrong with me? Yes, so that is some things I wanted to discuss, my errors, my mistakes, my constellations was more of me forgetting certain things existed, and misunderstanding a question. The dual wielding, oh, my dinner's done. The dual wielding, I misunderstood how that worked completely, and the Guardians of Empyrean, I made 2 very bad assumptions about the Guardians of Empyrean. But after this episode, oh, there was also another mention of, specifically, I almost forgot this question. This was a recent question. And Michael Sonby asked me, how do I handle inventory? Specifically, what mods do I use? How do I set up my bank? And when I sell items versus blowing them up for parts. Alright. Now, there are a couple of ways I can answer this. First off, I don't use mods currently. That's actually, I'm currently kind of wary of mods because that is originally how I lost my data late last year, was by modding my game, rather apparently excessively. So that is quite, that makes me very nervous for me. That I don't use mods currently. I'll just put it that way. I will eventually get back into using mods. I would like to go through the game and explore mods after this series because using mods is almost a separate game. So I will eventually get back into using mods, but first I'm going to create a backup of this, and I don't want to get into mods until I've at least finished this character. I also know for a fact that Iron Crate is planning on releasing another Grim Dawn update very soon, so there will also be that, so I'll probably do one more playthrough until next year's major update. It depends on how big the update is upcoming. I will make a video at least talking about the update, when it happens, when it drops, and I will at that point decide, do I want to do a complete... Is this update big enough to merit another complete, thorough run-through? And that's going to depend. The second question, how do I set up my bank? I'm going to be honest, I use either builds I got bored with, or builds that didn't work out the way I thought they would. I abandon those characters and use them as storage. That's just how it is. And every once in a while, I would say once every 6 months, I will go through and wipe out excess inventory. I haven't had the time to do that this year yet, not extensively, mostly because, first off, I've been very busy. Second off, since wiping my data, I haven't had the inventory to really wipe. But I do typically use no longer usable characters for extra storage, basically. Now, this is my individual, when I am exploring with, say, pure theory here, I'm going to store anything I don't immediately recognize as something that I need. Alright? Even if I don't think I need it, even if I know I have a copy of it, I will probably store it. The only exception to this rule is items under level 50, mostly because, frankly, they give you the same amount of bits most of the time as things over 50. Let me see if I can grab an example out here. Let me see. We have a regular immaterial edge, and we have an empowered immaterial edge. Now, let me pretend to go sell these. This one sells for 711 bits. This one sells for only 300 more. That's not a huge difference. You pick up more off the ground, honestly. So, for a lot of my under level 50 items, I will typically sell these, especially since it costs dynamite to dismantle these, okay? Dynamite is a lot harder to come up with than any amount of iron bits. So for these basic lower level items, they're not worth dismantling, because first off, when you dismantle lower level items, they almost always give you scrap. And scrap is, again, so easy to find. Let me give you an example. Look how much scrap I have collected over the course of, what has it been, like, yeah, it's been roughly 9 months since I've had my damage wiped, my save wiped, and then it re-wiped itself, I think 3 months later, so about 6 months, yeah, in 6 months, I have collected 1,200 pieces of scrap, roughly speaking. I mean, you will very quickly find yourself tripping over large quantities of scrap. It's just how it works. So, it's not often worth it to me to dismantle anything under the level of 50. So there's that. The second point I would like to make is I don't necessarily dismantle everything. It depends primarily on how desperate I am for specific components. Because there are two things you should really be aware of. And this is specifically if your character is between the levels of 50 and 80. I'll explain why in a hot second. Now, in the Tyrant's Hold, there is a ghost smith who will forge you a random legendary item of roughly 75. And this takes the various components that you can find around the world, brains, blood, hearts, whatever, all of these. Now, the reason why you only really need to care about this from 50 to 80 is because level 75 legendary artifacts can still be very useful to you, even roughly around the level of 80. But once you start moving past 80, level 75 artifacts just often aren't going to cut it anymore. So, at that particular point, you're probably looking for more longer-term, if not permanent, equipment, and you no longer need that. But from the levels of 50 to 80, if you really need some legendary artifacts, or you're really low on your equipment, your equipment is just absolutely trash for level 50, you're struggling your way through level 50, and you have a whole bunch of crafting components, go for that. forge some legendaries. If you don't have enough crafting components, that's when you start blowing them up. But don't blow up set pieces. You can convert them using, again, these crafting materials. I can actually show you an example of this. Let me go to Devil's Crossing for a hot second. And I will show you this. But for any item that is part of a set, it's really not worth blowing them up, because you can convert pieces of a set. I need to actually pull out a piece of a set. I suppose I can just use my Flamekeeper's gun, actually. And you can convert these over. Hold on, have I? Yeah, I needed to do that really quick. Yes. So, oh, I don't have the transmute yet because I haven't gotten far enough in the Forgotten Gods. Anyways, with transmuting, you can convert a piece of the a piece of one set into another. Now, this is the mythical Flamekeepers, so I can only convert this into another mythical piece. So obviously, with this one piece, I wouldn't necessarily want to do that because I don't have, you know, spare mythical Flamekeepers repeater on me at the time. But what you essentially want to do is keep spares of your set, spares of any piece of a set, until you have, personally, I like to keep at least one, if not two, of every one item. This is a personal preference of mine. This is a habit I've gotten into, especially of single-hand weapons. Even if you only want to keep one of each legendary artifact piece, whatever, at all levels, keep two of each weapon, because sometimes there'll be builds where you'll want two of each weapon, and if you don't have it, you'll be kind of bummed. But I do usually keep roughly two of everything if I can. I don't usually keep three. But yeah, if you want to use a notebook or a spreadsheet to keep track of what you've got, I know a lot of people do that. Let me rephrase that. I know a lot of people use spreadsheets. I don't know if a lot of people write them down. What I will also do, additionally, is I'm actually going to quit out to my main menu for this. My final piece of organization is, you will see all of these characters here. These are all, not all of them are failed builds. Some of them are builds that I'm currently working on. Some of them are failed builds. I would say roughly 2/3 of these are failed builds. Like Bloodgore is a failed build, but he is an infiltrator. I can already tell you in a moment that he is going to have Inquisitor pieces in his storage, because that's how I organize them. I organize them by their class. For example, Demon I actually haven't touched storage-wise, but fewer. I know for a fact this is Inquisitor and Demolitionist, if I'm remembering what Purifier is off the top of my head. No, I'm sorry. Purifier is Oathkeeper Demolitionist. And this character is going to have items that are part of that build. Grim is a Warlock. That is Occultist Arcanist. Grim will be holding Arcanist and Occultist pieces of equipment. Right? Now, because of my current lack of cleaning house recently, Grim will also probably be holding pieces of equipment that even remotely relate to either Occultist or Arcanist. So Grim will be probably having their inventory some stuff that is for Arcanist Shaman, some stuff that is for Occultist Soldier, etc. But that is roughly how I am organizing this. It's a little out of control right now, I will admit. I have, again, not cleaned house in a little while. I'm hoping to do so one of these weekends, that I can just clear this all out, get this out of here, you know, get rid of my spares, put all of my equipment with the specific characters that'll actually, you know, represent what I want them to hold. But that is usually how I organize these. I'm not currently using mods. I know mods are very popular. I will eventually get back into using mods once I have backed this up, once I've gotten Pure Theory to level 100 and done, you know, a couple of follow-up videos with Pure Theory, I will be talking about mods more, but at this point in time, this is my organization system. It's not the greatest. I'll freely admit that. It's a terrible organization system. It's very slapdash. I haven't cleaned it in a hot minute. I haven't cleaned it since getting my data, or getting to this point after my previous rewipe, re-getting my data from before the second rewipe. Anyways, that's a complex memory storage conversation, but I will clean that up, and I will be getting equipment where it belongs, but this is generally how it is. There are, I'm sure, pieces of equipment that are just scattered throughout that have nothing to do with the characters that are holding them. They're just there because of convenience. But there is one other thing I want to talk about in terms of organization, and this is something that I've been doing relatively consistently in terms of my organization. I have exactly 3 rules of my organization, right? Let me actually use Word of Renewal really quick just to speed up the run here. But in my transfer stash, I will have 3 of these 6 bags set aside for extremely specific purposes. My first one is almost always, I don't know why the Mythical Burning Purifier is here, that actually needs to be pulled out. My first bag is almost always used for equipment that is usable by all classes all the time. Is this pistol supposed to be here? This pistol is not supposed to be here. This amulet, that amulet is fine. So all of these pieces of equipment in here, this shouldn't be in here, should it? Yeah, it is. It's Ring of Valiance. All this equipment is usable by all classes. The reason why I do this is because should a build have a lack of something, I can come in here and maybe fill that out. For example, in the early game, I have several sets of explorers set. One of the few, this actually you'll notice this is one of the few exceptions to my 2 to 3 rule. Because these are usable by all classes, I typically use this equipment way more often than any other, to the point where they're often used by multiple builds simultaneously. I just can't focus on one class too long. So I will often keep spares of a lot of these. So you'll notice multiple copies of a lot of this particular page. I have a bunch of Fet and Masks because should I reach level 50, 75, or whatever, I can have a helmet. If I don't have a good helmet at level 50, I can put on a Fet and Mask and have a decent helmet. Or if I'm 75 and I need a helmet, I can put on the Fetin Mask and have a decent helmet. I can, at 35, if I need something, I can put on the Herald's set and have a decent one. I think I have an Empowered set around here somewhere. I think that's on someone, actually. No, I have part of it here. Okay. And, at 65, if I need some equipment, here it is. And if I need extra damage, I've got Chains of Anguish here. I've got the Royal set here, the Royal Exuberance set. I've got, I think, most of the Valiance set. I've never been able to find the 4th piece, I don't think. Pendant of Valiance. There's the Herald's Ward. We have the Ring of Valiance. Yeah, I think I'm missing the Ring of Valiance, yeah. But I have, once I complete this set, I can have this jewelry set plus metal when I'm level 65. If I don't have anything good in those slots. If I have terrible shoulders, I can replace the under 50 shoulders with the decorated pauldrons. I've got Tinker's Ingenuity if I have a terrible belt, etc. But this first page is entirely for what I call the emergency utility equipment. Right? Let's put these 2 things away here. My last page is always where I'm going to store my components and random pieces of builds that I want to try at some point. For example, right here we have the Octavius set. I would like to redo the Octavius set. I have not done the Octavius set with Inquisitor. When I ran the Octavius build, I ran it specifically with Soldier and Oathkeeper. Thank you for the memory. I ran it with Soldier Oathkeeper, and I have not yet done it with Inquisitor, and I would really like to. Right? So that's something I've got on a check. I've got mentally. I'm keeping it here for that reason. I want to do something specifically with the Necromancer Arcanist that isn't involving pets. I haven't done that in a long time. And so on. And these are all reminding me of certain builds that I want to try. Except for this, I just threw this in here because I think this was I didn't have any room anywhere else. But these are all things that I want to try. This was specifically because it was such an awesome piece of equipment, and I'm working on a character that will use that. This was something else that I wanted to make a build with at some point, because it really interests me. Same thing with the mythical Aetherstorm Seal here. But that's what I use this for. But first and foremost, this is components, this is building materials. You'll see I have spare dynamite in here. I've got my relics in here because I don't know why, but I like to keep my relics separate. I think this is a me problem. But this is where I store my components, my building materials. This third page, you'll notice that a lot of this focuses around Arcanist and Occultist. This is because my current multiplayer character that I'm working on with family is a Warlock, is an Occultist Arcanist, so this is all of the equipment that I could find in 15 minutes throughout my various characters that maybe I want to do. I'm doing another improv build. I'm doing a quasi-improv, so my skills, well, at least some of my skills I already know. I want to be doing the character is a Fabric of Reality focused Chaos Aether damage dealer. I'm leaning towards offhands, but I might not finish with them at this time. I might switch into two-handed weapon, maybe. I'm not sure yet where I want to take that character. It's only level 35, I think, 36. Not very high levels, so I'm still kind of feeling out where I want the character to go. I am somewhat tempted to use two-handed weapons. I haven't used the Scythe of Tenebris in a while. I haven't used a two-handed Warlock in an extremely long time. It's been a very long time since I've used a two-handed Warlock, and I would like to try it again after all this time. I think it's been a couple of years since I've done a two-handed Warlock, actually, so I might do that. But I am kind of bouncing back and forth mentally for that character between an offhand and a single-hand weapon or two-handed weapons. I'm not sure yet. I won't really know for sure until I hit at least level 50, and then I'll be at least more clear. But it's something I'm working on in the background, but this third page will always be used on some other build that I'm working on. I usually try to stick to working on 2 builds at a time, so right now I'm working on of course, the quasi-improv Stormjack full spread, storm spread build, or what I'm gonna just basically call for simplicity's sake the spread build. So I'm working on this build, and then I have, of course, my quasi-basic Fabric of Reality Warlock, which is fairly, standard. It's not that unusual. But I'm looking to do something a little bit different with it. I'm still not dedicated to the offhand, but, that's the other build I'm working on at the same time. The rest of these I will use as I need. This is just random storage for excess runoff, and that just happens. That's fine. You'll notice I have a bunch of copies of the Mythical Black Hand of Sinarsin. I need to get rid of these one way or another. Whether or not I dismantle them, or if I just keep them around or whatever, I don't know. But, that remains to be seen. So, yeah, that's basically how I organize. But these 3 other ones I use basically for emergency purposes. Say, for example, I find a piece of equipment that's really good for a friend or a family member. I'll put it in one of my I'll put it in one of these 3 spares for them for later. Oh, hey, by the way, I found this really neat thing. Maybe you'd like to use this for your build. Things like that. That's what I use those transfer for. But I always have 3 dedicated transfer spots. One for utility emergency equipment, one for components and crafting materials, and one to just transfer items and just deposit, basically dump en masse items into for another build that I'm working on. I didn't do that with Pure Theory because I wanted this to be a pure quasi-improv, where I wanted to be picking up a lot of my weapons. I still broke that to some extent, but that's okay. I haven't looked through my inventory in a while. I really do need to get around to doing that. Maybe I'll come up with some other stuff for good old Pure Theory here, but I'm doubting it. But that is generally how I organize my items, roughly speaking. So, yeah, this turned out to be a bit longer of a video than I thought, but that's okay. But when this goes up, I am going to be deleting the Paladin video, the class examination of the Paladin, and re-recording and re-uploading that. It will probably be up the day after you see this. I'm recording this early Wednesday morning, so you will probably see the return of the Paladin, the re-upload of the Paladin video Thursday, very likely. Late Thursday. So, I hope this cleared everything up. I do apologize for the errors. These were purely my fault. And I apologize to Case Deck for misunderstanding your question. And thank you for Crab Turtle for reminding me that certain constellations exist. I hope you enjoyed. I hope this cleared up some issues. And thank you all very much for listening. and we will be returning to regularly scheduled playthrough content next episode. Theoretically. But thank you for your time. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you for being here with me. And I hope you enjoyed, and have a great 24 hours.